Oh, perfect. Okay. And those look like nice comfy seats. Sometimes you're like trying to figure out how to sit. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Got it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Just take it off. Yeah.
Take it off, and then your knee is going to
It's all I think.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you.
Alfredo, grab those. Look to your right.
I think that'd be lovely.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Denise Sears, President and CEO of SOS International, a global health organization based here in Louisville. We're going to get started, but we want you to enjoy your lunch, so please enjoy. As a proud member of USGLC's Kentucky Advisory Committee, I'm thrilled to be surrounded here this afternoon by friends who care deeply about America's role in the world. Whether you're here in the room, breaking bread together, or tuning in virtually from across the American South, I think we can all agree that the last several years have indicated how interconnected and intertwined our security and our prosperity are with the rest of the world. The good news is that these topics we'll discuss today are where we can really come together from across the region and across the political spectrum to work towards solutions. These are not Democratic or Republican issues. These are issues that affect all Americans. These are issues that are worth talking about with your family at the kitchen table or with your friends at the neighborhood restaurant. Here in the room with us are leaders from across Kentucky, from big cities to small towns, urban to rural. We are leaders of the business, humanitarian, and faith communities. We are public servants, and we are military veterans. And from these diverse backgrounds, we can find common ground about how America shows up in the world. Take global health, for example. Over 80% of the world's population has inadequate or non-existent access to medical care. Since 2010, SOS International has impacted over 14 million lives by elevating healthcare services at hospitals and clinics in over 100 countries. We have reclaimed over 5 million pounds of usable medical supplies and equipment that otherwise would have ended up in landfills. Instead, these meet critical health needs across the world while promoting environmental stewardship. Thanks to our healthcare partners in Kentucky and across 7 other states, thanks to our NGO partners here, WaterStep and Love the Hungry, together we are saving lives, alleviating suffering, and strengthening global stability, which not only improves our national security, but showcases the best of our nation's values. It is not just the SOS local work which is impacting our local community. It is our international work that is critical to the health, safety, and prosperity of citizens here and across the country. So on that note, let's dive in. We'll be covering a lot of ground in a short amount of time, so buckle up. It is now my pleasure to welcome to the stage, here in Louisville, USGLC Director of Development and Strategic Partnerships, Dana Bruce.
Thank you, Denise, for kicking off our second annual South Summit. Last year, USGLC hosted our first South Summit in Little Rock, Arkansas, with Senator John Bozeman, and I'm thrilled to be here 1 year later in the great city of Louisville, Kentucky, especially with a dear friend of USGLC, Leader Mitch McConnell. Leader McConnell, it is our honor to host you today among so many friends and colleagues. To everyone here, welcome. While we've got a great crowd here in Louisville, we are also joined by over 100,000 people online from across the South. So all eyes on you guys. I would especially like to thank the people and organizations who made today's event possible, including all of our local partners, our Kentucky Advisory Committee members, the Coca-Cola Company, USGLC's South Initiative Chair, and of course, our incredible special guest you will hear from shortly. I invite everyone to join in the conversation on social media using the hashtag SouthSummit24 to chime in. And so I'm up here today to tell you a little bit about USGLC and why we're so glad that you've chosen to spend your afternoon with us. You heard a little bit from Denise, but at USGLC, we bring together a diverse network of leaders from all 50 states, including 9 states from the American South, the fastest growing region in the United States. We are joined by over 500 American businesses and humanitarian organizations, thousands of military veterans, faith-based leaders, and foreign policy luminaries who all come together around the importance of our civilian tools of national power, development, and diplomacy. Our coalition represents a rich spectrum of backgrounds and experiences, from USGLC's year-long Next Gen leadership program to our Farmers for Prosperity. Our network spans from coast to coast throughout the country, from Maine to Arizona, Washington to Florida, and right here in Kentucky, and everywhere in between. And what brings us all together is our shared belief in America's global leadership. We believe that strategic investments in diplomacy and development are essential to protecting our national security, advancing our economic interests, and projecting the very best of American values. It's why we talk about how a tiny 1% of the federal budget, called the International Affairs Budget, is one of the most cost-effective and powerful investments America makes. It's why we talk about leading globally matters locally. We ask a simple question: what's it worth? What is it worth for America to be engaged in the world? What's it worth to invest in diplomacy, global development, and foreign assistance? What's it worth to our security, our health, and our local economies? We have heard powerful stories from you. Business leaders answer, it means more customers here at home. Veterans tell us it keeps our service members out of harm's way. Farmers say it means more global markets for crops. We are proud to bring these stories and these conversations across the state because engagement in the world has a direct impact on our kitchen table issues. So now we want to hear from you. Whether you're here in the room with us or online, I'm going to ask you to take out your phone and go to menti.com, M-E-N-T-I. We are going to make a big word cloud together. I'm asking you, what is it worth? What is America's global leadership worth to the South? So you can follow the instructions on the screen and give us a word. Why does global engagement matter to the South? And all the words you type in are going to appear on the screens. All right, let's see what you guys think. Security, prosperity, democracy, everything. That is our focus today. To talk about the connectivity of our values, our security, our democracy, and our economy. Thank you all for being part of our journey to build a better, safer, more prosperous world. And with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Ashley Watts, President and CEO of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, to the stage.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many friends, and those who are not from Louisville or Kentucky, welcome to Kentucky. We're thrilled to have you. As you've heard already, the stakes for U.S. global leadership are higher than ever. With a growing number of international crises and humanitarian conflicts raging around the world, it is clear that leading globally matters locally, and that leading locally, as we do here in Kentucky and throughout the South, can have a global impact. Think about our economy. The majority of people who buy American goods and services do not live in America, and many of them live in developing worlds where markets are growing the fastest. In fact, 11 of America's top 15 trading partners were once recipients of foreign aid. 1 in 5 American jobs are tied to international trade. And 1/3 of all manufacturing jobs in the U.S. are directly tied to our exports. The leaders of our businesses here in Louisville and throughout Kentucky will tell you that the private sector alone cannot keep us competitive in a global marketplace that is growing so rapidly. This is why we need these vital strategic investments in diplomacy and development to help fight corruption, promote the rule of law, and open new markets for our goods and services, which is key to our economic prosperity here at home. I'll be blunt. It's good for the world, and it's good for American business and national security. Here in Kentucky, we are privileged to be represented by Leader McConnell, who not only understands this, but is a champion for it. Though he needs no introduction, Leader McConnell has had a long career representing Kentuckians in Washington, D.C., having served in the Senate since 1985. Over the course of his nearly 40 years of service, he has made a name for himself as a conservative champion for America's global leadership, including as longtime member of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on State, Foreign Operations, and Related Programs, of which he has served as chairman for over 10 years. Over the past 2.5 years, Leader McConnell has been a vocal champion for American assistance to Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression. In his words, isolationists must face the fact that American leadership is as indispensable today as it was 40 years ago, that our credibility is not divisible, and that European security and prosperity is tied inextricably to our own. Today, he is serving his 17th year as Senate Republican leader, the longest tenured party leader in Senate history. Though he will be stepping down from this position at the end of this Congress, his leadership has undoubtedly left an indelible mark on the Senate. Personally, as a lifelong Kentuckian, I don't want to age either one of us, but I have known very little life without Leader McConnell being our true North Star here in Kentucky, representing not only our state, but us on a national and international stage. Mr. Leader, we are grateful for you for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on how we can continue to ensure America leads on the world stage and leverage our civilian national security tools to ensure the safety and the economic well-being of all Kentuckians and Americans across the country. Leader McConnell will then be joined in a fireside chat with my good friend Scott Jennings, a Republican strategist who serves as a political contributor for CNN and is also founding partner of Run Switch PR here in Louisville. And if you've turned on CNN over the last month, Scott has been very busy. We know we are in for an engaging and enlightening conversation. So please join me now and welcome to the stage our steadfast leader and my senator, Leader Mitch McConnell.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley, and welcome to town, those of you who don't live here. You know, I've been around so long, just to give you a sense of what that's like. My first real break in politics was my internship with Henry Clay. I'm frequently asked, what's it like to be leader of your party in the Senate? And since I've been doing this so long, I've finally come up with the perfect answer. It's a little bit like being the groundskeeper to cemetery. Everybody's under you, but no one is listening. I very much appreciate this organization and find myself in agreement with almost everything you advocate. Next month will be the 85 years since Germany's invasion of Poland triggered the largest and bloodiest conflict in human history. But years before American GIs would set foot on European soil, we faced a moment of national reckoning right here at home over America's role in the conflict, and as it turns out, our leadership in the whole world. Large shares of our people had bought into a very narrow view of our interests beyond our own shores. The dark days of the Depression and the First World War weighed heavily on the American people. They had elected representatives in Congress who voted consistently against investment in our own defense. The isolationist fervor gripping the nation was so strong, in fact, that President Roosevelt had been compelled to sign a series of neutrality acts limiting our ability to come to the aid of friends and allies facing the specter of Nazi and Japanese aggression. By the way, the slogan in those years sounds familiar to you. It was America first. But no ocean could isolate America from the winds of war. And with the benefit of hindsight, we all know now, abruptly, this holiday from history came to an end. By the late spring of 1940, as the Nazis invaded France, polls reported that after years of hesitant and skepticism, the vast majority of Americans were suddenly willing to spend whatever was necessary on national defense. By the time Japan attacked Pearl Harbor the following year, even one of the most prominent opponents of American engagement, Senator Arthur Brandenburg of Michigan, quoted, "That day ended isolationism for any realist." But years of resistance to investments in our military had already taken their toll. Even as Congress raced to pass massive appropriations above and beyond what FDR requested, America's industrial base simply couldn't keep up. Years of neglect had left us short of raw materials, machinery, and manpower. As the Navy's top admiral at the time put it, quote, "Dollars cannot buy yesterday." America faced a world on fire, but we were not yet prepared to put it out. War revealed the truly dire consequences of investing in defense too late. These consequences can be measured in dollars as well, such as at the height of World War II, we were spending 37% of our gross domestic product on military, 37%. To put that in context, if you're a member of NATO, you're expected to spend 2% of your GDP on defense. So it's pretty clear that fighting a war is a lot more expensive than preventing one. Not to mention all the people who were killed in the process. In our country, over 400,000 service members gave their lives to defend our country and way of life during that war. Countless civilians across Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. The American homeland was largely spared, but technology has shrunk the globe, and future conflict could very well bring such terrible costs to our own shores. World War II's end ushered in a new era for American foreign policy. Through great debates over America's role in the world would chug on, the century was marked, for the most part, by a strong bipartisan commitment to global leadership that has ensured our peace, prosperity, and security over time. America became a guarantor of stability provided by an American-established international order. Our global role continues to preserve our peace and prosperity to this day, sometimes in ways not so obvious. Here in Kentucky, supply chains are living, breathing proof of America's leadership in the world. Rural bourbon producers reach buyers from Madrid to Melbourne. Steel mills supply manufacturers of surgical tools, skyscrapers, and spacecrafts. And Ford and Toyota rely on imported parts at production plants in Louisville and Georgetown. We often forget that Toyota itself is a Japanese company that has invested billions of dollars into our economy, providing nearly 10,000 jobs in central Kentucky. All of this runs on the premise of a set of rules underpinned by American leadership that guarantees secure and sustained access to global markets and freedom of navigation of strategic sea lanes and trade routes. We don't have to look back far to understand the importance of the free flow of both goods and people. COVID-19 ground production to a halt all across the South. Among many things, it dislodged our supply chains, causing years-long backlogs for parts, supplies, and raw materials that feed our country and create jobs. As costly and painful as the pandemic was, global war would strain our world, our economy, and the American household in a much worse way. But here's the big difference. These risks are within our means to control. That's because when America upholds the rules, we set the table for our own prosperity. President Reagan saw this plainly. He understood what it took to defend our interests. What it took was peace through strength. The idea that hard power is what actually preserves peace and prevents war. When Reagan sat down across from Gorbachev, American strength helped his hand diplomatically and strategically. Credible hard power gave soft power its weight. And a word or two about soft power. The most enthusiastic supporters of foreign assistance that I've ever met are members of the military, because they know you can get support through diplomacy, particularly with all of your friends, much more cheaply than you can be involved in warfare. I think I saw on the screen 1% of our budget, foreign assistance. Nobody realizes how little we actually spend on the diplomatic side to help avoid a war. Now, for the first time since the fall of the Berlin Wall, we ourselves face an era of great power competition. A new axis of evil has formed. We're seeing Iran and North Korea arming Russia's war in Ukraine, China helping Iran skirt international sanctions to fund its assault on Israel. We're seeing a friendship without limits between Moscow and Beijing, and China arming itself at a literally alarming rate. Our enemies are surely working to undercut our influence around the world, but here at home, we're undercutting American strength just the same. For 4 straight years, President Biden has put forward a budget that amounts to a net cut in defense after inflation. In the 1940s, the belated defense spending I discussed earlier spiked to 37% of GDP. Given the Reagan buildup that helped end the Cold War, it was only 6% of GDP. Today, defense spending sits at 2.7% of GDP. And even maintaining this level is like pulling teeth with too many of my colleagues in Washington. Bottom line is clear. We cannot expect China, Russia, and Iran to play by the rules if we're not willing to lead with strength. In fact, our adversaries are determined to undermine American leadership, to rewrite all these rules, and there's no question that if they succeed, it will be to America's disadvantage. Some in Congress are waking up to the importance of a strong defense. Earlier this year, a bipartisan majority passed supplemental funding to rebuild the arsenal of democracy and assist our friends on the front lines of Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific. And I was aggressively in my party advocating that. But as I've said before, strength is not a one-time injection. It's the product of sustained, serious investment. And this moment requires a renaissance of investment in American hard power. If we would like our military force to remain an option of last resort, as I do, then we must invest seriously in our strength today. Now, I know it's a difficult time to ask for greater spending as Americans carry the burden of inflation, but putting off this investment any longer will expose Americans to an even greater burden, the burden of funding an unwelcome war. The fact remains that it's a lot cheaper to prevent a war than to be in one. It can be easy to turn inward, to ignore the responsibilities of leadership that have underpinned our peace, prosperity, and security. To those who criticize greater investment in our defense, I would pose the following question. Which of these interests are you willing to abandon? We can't afford to wait for another attack before we get serious about defending our interests. We must do what we can do today to keep the peace tomorrow. So, my friends, thank you for all of that, and thank you for what you do. months after the Russian invasion, and just getting there is an interesting experience. You had to get on a train. It took you 12 hours to get from eastern Poland to Kyiv. It was worth the trip. And he was determined then, he's determined now. And my biggest criticism of the Biden administration is, even after we announce we're going to send some weapon system, it doesn't happen for the longest period of time. We not only need to help them, but we need to help them when it's still relevant. I thought the Ukrainian invasion of Russia was an act of convincing the rest of the world that they can make progress, and this is not over. Putin is counting on us losing interest and just rolling over, and then forcing the Ukrainians to accept a bad deal. I'm totally opposed to that approach, and from a financial point of view, even if you were not enthusiastic about all of the developments in a positive way in defense in this country, what we're spending on Ukraine is about 0.02% of our GDP to help these brave people defeat the Russians.
How does it end? You say Putin's waiting on us to lose interest, but for the Ukrainians, how do they bring this to an end eventually, in your mind?
Well, I think it's up to them to say what the definition of success is. I've always been, particularly with allies, reluctant to tell them what to do. We've made those mistakes, in my view, in the Israel war as well, by telling them what the tactics should be. And my counterpart in the Senate even announced they ought to choose a new prime minister. Usually, our approach to allies who are in conflicts is to help them, not tell them how to fight, because they have to live there. And slow walk assistance. So I say that to the Ukrainians, you need to decide what the definition of victory is. They want all their territory back. Well, we'll see. They sent a strong message with this incursion into Russia that they're not going backward.
You brought up Israel, so I'll turn to that next. You were at Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech to the joint session. Several of your colleagues were not, including the Vice President, who did not preside over the Senate that day. Would you mind to talk to us about your view of our special relationship with Israel, and also about how we're treating them today and what you're hoping the next president will do, because obviously we still have American hostages there and other hostages as well.
Israel has been overwhelmingly popular in this country. We have a small Jewish population in Kentucky, about 12,000. But the people that come to my office every year who are the most enthusiastic supporters of Israel is a Christian organization. So it's a unique place for a whole lot of reasons. And however, a number of Americans have decided they want to try to dictate to Israel what their domestic leadership is. And they don't like Netanyahu. And that's particularly true on the Democratic side. So when we were doing the supplemental, which was for Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan, the Democrats were sort of divided on Israel and the Republicans were sort of divided on Ukraine. We shouldn't be divided on either. And the other shocking thing I think has happened in our country is the outgrowth of anti-Semitism. I thought that was just a couple of nutcases in rural Idaho or someplace. It's very, very disturbing, particularly among younger people. And we've got to got a ways to go to fight back against that kind of awful view of Judaism.
I want to turn back to NATO. You brought it up earlier. You've always been a steadfast supporter. You've called it today the most successful military alliance in human history. Critics of NATO say the member states don't do enough. Maybe it's outlived its usefulness. What's your view of the health and stability of NATO today, and how would you answer those critics, particularly in the context of this election?
Yeah, I think we had all kind of gone to sleep thinking we would take a holiday from history. And I think there were only 3 European NATO members that met the 2% of GDP at the beginning. Now, 22 of them beat that. And we have 2 new countries, Finland and Sweden, who are not a drag. They had serious defense policies, both of them. So Putin has managed to strengthen NATO. We only have one arguably kind of weak link, and that's Hungary, which has sort of fallen in love with the Chinese and the Russians. But with that exception, NATO is stronger and more committed than ever. And so that's a good thing that's come out of this. We've sort of all awakened to what's necessary to prevent the next war.
I want to wrap up with the topic of isolationism, which you addressed obviously in your remarks, and the similarities between the interwar years and the challenges that we face today. You're a student of history. You've spoken to me many times about the Republican Party's historical flirtations with isolationism. I wanted to give you a chance to make the best Republican argument about the need to resist this urge to withdraw from the world. And specifically for this group, within that argument, the absolute best Republican persuasive argument for the need to invest in hard and soft American power.
I just tried to do that, and I think it's pretty clear that having a war is way more expensive than avoiding one. People get killed, sometimes massive numbers of them. The challenge all of us have in democracies is how do you sell that to regular voters whose first reaction to something like foreign assistance or to helping others is, why? As if it's charity. It's not charity. It's in America's best interest. For example, one of the things we do that benefits the world and ourselves is we keep the sea lanes open for commerce. And we learned, in case people didn't know this already, during the pandemic, how interconnected we all are. But it takes people to, number one, tell the truth. There's a lot of nonsense being spouted in the country these days. Tell the truth, make the argument, and hope people will listen. But even if it's not particularly popular, I mean, for example, I've seen polls that say Americans think we're spending half of our money on foreign aid. It's only 1%. Foreign aid has never been popular, but I've always voted for it because even though it's not something most people embrace, it's essential for our country. And to have, as I said earlier, we are the example that every democratic country in the world wants to emulate. Good things will happen as long as we're in a leadership position. Isolationism will create enormous problems for this country, enormous. And that's something you've got to just keep saying. to people as frequently as you can.
You've always voted for it. You've never lost an election in Kentucky. You've been the longest serving senator in the history of the Commonwealth. You've been the longest serving leader of either party in the United States Senate. And on behalf of this audience, Senator, thank you for your steadfast leadership throughout the years, for promoting the idea that American leadership in the world is a good thing. Mitch McConnell, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Leader McConnell. We are so grateful for your leadership here in Kentucky and across the entire South. And thank you, of course, to Scott Jennings for guiding an excellent conversation. It is now my pleasure to introduce our final conversation for today's South Summit. Global threats to U.S. national security grow by the day with our adversaries and our competitors. And increasingly, we see that these threats are economic. It's why we need to better understand and better tell the story of how economic security is national security. Our next discussion will seek to do just that, and we are thrilled to be joined by two experts. We have with us today Lieutenant General Larry Nicholson, who served in the U.S. Marine Corps for nearly 4 decades, where he retired as the commanding general of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force, leading 30,000 Marines and sailors in the South Asia Pacific. Today, USGLC is pleased to count General Nicholson as a member of the National Security Advisory Council. Thank you, General Nicholson, for your service. We also have my friend and Kentucky Chamber Board member, Nick DeAndre, who is the Global Vice President of the Public Affairs for UPS, which is based, of course, right here in Louisville. Guiding this discussion today is USGLC's Dana Bruce. Please join me in welcoming General Nicholson, Nick, and Dana to the stage.
How are you?
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. We're going to dive right in, especially following the leader's remarks about how our investments in development, diplomacy, and defense are in our strategic interest. So, General, I'd love to start with you. Top military leaders and veterans are some of the first to call for these investments, as the leader said, and in order to keep our service members out of harm's way. And over recent years, Congress has heard testimony from America's leading military voices, combatant commanders who oversee continents and engagement arenas across the globe. General Langley of AFRICOM, which oversees the Department of Defense's work in Africa, told Congress that we need a 3D approach, which is a toolkit of diplomacy, development, and defense. Drawing on your experience, why are America's diplomats and civilian international affairs agencies such critical partners for the military?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Dan. And it's great to be here in the Commonwealth. I'm Larry Nicholson, and I came in the Marine Corps for 4 years. Graduated from a little school in Charleston called the Citadel, and married a girl from Clemson, drove to California, joined the Marine Corps, and as Dana said, spent almost 39 years wearing the cloth of our nation, and feel very strongly about the topic that we're going to discuss here today. So any first-year ROTC student, Dana, knows the acronym DIME. DIME is the 4 levers of national power: diplomatic, D; I is informational. I'll cover that in a second. M is military, and E is economic. And we talk about those are the 4 levers of national power. Information will be, I was in Vietnam. Almost said North Vietnam. I was in Vietnam not too long ago, and walking down the street, it seemed like every other teenager was wearing a New York Yankees hat. Taylor Swift was blasting from the stereos around. There was Mickey Mouse stores and Hilton hotels and Pizza Hut and Starbucks everywhere. That's informational power. That's it's rock and roll. It's jazz. It's who we are. Give me something informational from Russia. Give me something informational from China. It doesn't exist. So these are the levers of national power. I think that again, for us, deterrence plays into everything. And what is deterrence? Deterrence is being so ruthlessly ready for war that your enemy blinks. The enemy says, you know, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow. And so, and you do that by investing, as the senator just said, you invest in your partners and you invest in your allies. And there's a difference between partners and allies. We have 7 treaty allies around the world, NATO being one of them. But we got a lot of partners we spend a lot of time working with. So Dana, I think the answer to the question is understanding that the world looks at the United States in a way it looks at no other country, and is very dependent upon us for leadership on a daily basis. And just one last thing about NATO, because I know they mentioned it here, but remember there were 3 reasons for the founding of NATO. Okay, 3. 1, keep the Germans down because they had a tendency of spilling their borders and upsetting their neighbors. 2, keep the Russians out because as the senator said, his father said, when he wrote that letter from the Battle of the Bulge, that, hey, we're going to defeat the Nazis, but we got to watch those Russians. And the 3rd one is the one that talks to what the senator said a little bit too about isolationism. The 3rd tenet of NATO is keep the Americans in, because we do have a habit, a cyclic habit of going into an isolationist mode. So we can't afford it today. We couldn't afford it then. And so hopefully that answers a little bit of that question.
I think it answers a lot of that question. Thank you very much. So drilling down local, Nick, let's talk about the general took us globally into our allies and partners. I want to talk about the local to global economic connection. As in your role at UPS Public Affairs, you have a responsibility for public policy that affects all of the entities in Kentucky, including the UPS Airlines and Worldport, as well as the southeastern states. Talk to me about this global to local connection and how UPS is creating economic growth and impact here in Kentucky and for this region.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you. And thank you everybody for being here today, and certainly humbled to be serving on this panel with the general, and appreciate a lot of the legislative leadership that's here, as well as the NGO leadership and several different folks from the city. So, and that's the perfect example of what these organizations tend to do. And I know that's a great asset to the city, to the state, and this region. And so from our perspective, we always like to say that the largest operation that UPS has in the world is right here. Our bosses happen to be down the road in Atlanta, Georgia, but this is the nerve center of our operations. It's the largest we have across the globe. So with that means we have 30,000 employees that are employed here just in the city of Louisville and across the state. But in addition to that, we're responsible indirectly, if you look at all the different companies, which are well over 200 companies that have moved here to be closer to us. We have roughly responsible for about 62,000 jobs across the state of Kentucky, which accounts for about $2.5 billion in payroll and roughly $300 million in taxes to the state, which that $300 million accounts for 2% of the entire taxes collected in the Commonwealth. But it's not just us, right? It's about, I told you about those other 200 companies, but think of the cluster that Kentucky and this region has formed because of the supply chain sector here. And of course, we're the experts. There's other companies around here that are in this region that are experts as well. And so that really is, a real driver and great for this community and great for the region. And I will say though, and I said, I know I thanked a lot of the folks that are here, that partnership, and we wouldn't be able to be here if it wasn't for the partnership that occurs between the city, the state, the federal government. We wouldn't be able to be here in Louisville. And I'll tell you, I know we're going to talk a little bit about public-private partnerships, but one of those great public-private partnerships is what we call the Metropolitan College Program at UPS. So we talk about economic vitality. What we're doing is folks come work for us in our Next Day Air Hub. They go to college at either JCTC or the University of Louisville, and we pay for their education. So they work for us for 4 years. They get a free education. We pay for their books, and then they walk out of college debt-free. But the important thing is that's a burden shared by the state and the city. The state gives half of that money back to us in a tax credit. The city puts money in to fund various kind of advising opportunities for those students to make sure that they're getting through and matriculating through the system. And then what does that do? That creates a pipeline, right, for other positions in the community. So they come work for us for 4 years, and then they maybe go work for Ford, or maybe they go work for Humana, or maybe they go work for Norton. So the whole goal is to create that pipeline, which hopefully will last, for the rest of this region and create economic prosperity, which in terms of we've talked about is national security as well.
Indeed. And your position as a global company allows you to make that local impact.
That's right.
So, General, going back to alliances, and he and I had a talk about this earlier, and I got a deep dive schooling, but we're just going to touch the surface for you guys. You know, as a Marine, that one of the largest multilateral training operations every year is Cobra Gold. And I'll ask you to educate the audience a little bit on Cobra Gold. But dozens of America's allies and partners come together for this joint military and humanitarian exercise. And as we have talked about today, because of where it takes place, because it's in partnership with Thailand, this is especially important as China continues its rapid military buildup. So if you can, talk to me a little bit about why this is such a critical investment with our alliances, and why it's important to our national security, and how it supports America's military to more effectively address the threat.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. Boy, there's a lot to unwrap there. These are my opinions. These are not DOD or Marine Corps opinions. These are mine as a private citizen. But I would tell you, my sense is after 2000 and after September 11, 2001, physically and metaphorically, as a country, we put our head in the sand, the CENTCOM sand. And we were so focused on Iraq and Afghanistan and the Middle East, that became our focus. And we took our eye off the ball. We took our eye off of China. We quit watching China. And I think we made an assumption that China had joined the world economy. Again, you go to Shanghai, there's a Starbucks and a McDonald's and a Hilton hotel everywhere. And so the second largest economy in the world, they've lifted more people out of poverty than any country in the history of the world in the middle class. And we made an assumption that with that liberalization of their economic situation, that there would be a commensurate liberalization of the ability to dissent, the ability to disagree with your government, human rights. And it kind of went the other way while we were not looking. And then they started building a military that still today, if you go to Indo-PACOM today, and if you ask Admiral Paparo, why has China built this military? We'll talk about that, but my sense is I don't think there's a great answer. The senator mentioned that we keep the sea lanes open. We call them SLOCs, Sea Lines of Communication, the global commons. After World War II, the United States pledged into the Pacific that we would keep the lines of communication open to enable free trade. And you think about it, 20 years after the end of World War II, Japan is competing in the United States with automobiles. I mean, when has that ever happened that an adversary that has been defeated is now competing 20 years later, competing economically with the country that they defeated, both Germany and Japan. So Japan boomed under our protection. South Korea boomed. Today, try to buy a TV that's not from South Korea. Good luck with that. And of course, we've seen their automotive industry. Was in Korea not too long ago, the largest, the most modern country today in the world, the fastest internet in the world, all under the protection of the United States. Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, all moving forward. These are all partners that Dana talked about that participate in exercises. But the country that has benefited the most, without any doubt, from the protection of the United States has been who? It's been China. And so there's a little head scratching is what are they militarizing for? For what reason, under the protection of the United States, they've become the second biggest economy in the world. And now they're on this incredible build of their military. For what reason, we don't know. So flash to the question is, Cobra Gold is a large exercise in Thailand held every year. I attended it as a lieutenant 100 years ago, and I attended it as a general officer. And I'll tell you, it's a great exercise because we bring in so many allies and partners. But that's one of probably, Dana, 10 annual exercises around the world where we bring in partners and allies. One of the differences in the Pacific, we don't have a NATO. There is no NATO. We have 32 countries in Europe that comprise NATO. We don't have any similar organization. ASEAN is an economic group with Asian countries, but it is important to bring countries in to train with them. And I can tell you, as the commander of 3MEF in Japan, I spent very little time in Japan. I was all over the region consistently. We were training in Vietnam. We were training in Mongolia. We were, of course, in South Korea, the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia. On every day, we had sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines in all those countries training as we do today. So it's critically important to bring those militaries together. But again, it goes back to what is our policy is deterrence. We're not there yet, but the deterrence means that we are so incredibly ready for war that no one would ever want to go to war. And I think that survived that really during the Reagan years. That's what caused the wall to fall. And I think we're in a catch up right now. We are trying to catch up a little bit. We're not where we need to be, but couldn't be more important. Allies and partners training together.
Thank you, sir. Nick, back to the public-private partnerships. USGLC is a huge champion of America's businesses and NGOs and foundations partnering with U.S. government to make the most efficient and effective use of our investments in foreign aid and really tackle the world's challenges. You heard Denise talking about it earlier with SOS and her partnerships with the private sector and the medical supplies distribution. And we'll hear more from you, Nick. How can these partnerships leverage the strength of both public and private sector and make our efforts to tackle these challenges like the global health crisis, climate crisis, and food security even more effective? And what are some of the key achievements at UPS?
Yeah, thank you. And exactly to what the general said about training for us is getting those economic development groups together, right? So we can learn from each other, educate each other. And in fact, I want to say in the last 2 months, and I know Justin, who works with me at UPS, he gets the benefit of taking a lot of these folks on education tours of WorldPort, the hub here. We've had, I know, at least 30 ambassadors from around the world come visit WorldPort in the last month. And so those are and the ASEAN ambassadors came literally a month ago. And so that's the kind of education that needs to happen, because here's the key, right? And I'll talk a little bit about a little partnership that we have with Denise here in a minute. And that is the fact that there's got to be a way for the public sector to be able to understand the expertise and be educated on the expertise that folks like us have, right? Because if they don't know, then they're not going to be able to leverage upon us. And we have the expertise. Think about UPS. We operate in 220 companies, this large, vast network. I mean, we can easily turn that on to assist. And then the second part of that is trust, transparency, and inclusion. So the key is to make sure that all these organizations fill in that regard: trust, transparency, and inclusion. So make sure we're involved, everybody's involved up front. Make sure it's transparent, and make sure you trust each other. And that's where I think the best collaboration occurs, and that's what can strengthen the most, is that trust. And I'll just give a couple examples. I know Denise's name's been mentioned a few times. Our partnership with SOS International dates back many, many years, but it would be ad hoc. We never really, Denise understood our capabilities, but we really didn't understand theirs. And now what do we have? We have somebody on their board. And then during the early Ukraine war, we were able to work together to move some life-saving equipment to Ukraine that would have been difficult. It probably would have been months delayed had we not connected. And so it's that great collaboration there. And then of course we have a great collaboration with Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. For those that understand what they do, they make sure that or do their best to make sure that vaccines, and not just COVID vaccines, but other vaccines, are able to get into developing countries and others. And so we've made a large investment into that. And I think that's the key for businesses. It's not just throwing money at something, it's lending your expertise to make sure that you can help the organization move even more than just the funding that you may provide. So, for example, in some of these different countries that we're operating with Gavi, we are not only just providing millions of dollars to help with maybe turning on vaccine networks in Ethiopia, but we're helping to create cold chain storage units across these various places. And we're also lending our expertise to try to make sure that their networks are efficient so that they can be more efficient in delivering the goods that they need to. And so if there's anything I can say today, transparency, inclusion, and I'm missing a word, trust. Those are the three really important things that need to be enhanced with these partnerships.
Well, Nick, you mentioned 2 countries specifically, and that ties into my next question for the general. Many of our investments in these countries are in countries that we are considering to be potentially fragile states, states that are at risk of conflict, pandemics, natural disasters, and extremism. So during your long service in the armed services, you served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, in countries that we are considered fragile states and conflict states. And investments from the private sector can help prevent that. But drawing on your own experiences, how can strategic and smart investments in the Indo-Pacific region prevent many of those countries from falling to the same fate? And what role does the military play alongside State Department, USAID, and the private sector in addressing some of these crises?
Yeah, no, that's great. I as I got more senior in Fallujah, USAID was very important to us in terms of investing, working with the local engineers to kind of rebuild that city and hedge against sort of the extremism. And I'm happy to report that Fallujah today is a relatively prosperous city and is certainly recovered pretty well. I think you got to look at who's making the investments. I think everybody's heard of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is the Chinese foreign aid, so to speak. It's very transactional. It is 10 times, though, in terms of its scale and scope. Imagine, I think everybody's familiar with the Marshall Plan at the end of World War II, where I think we were really smart in terms of deciding that we were going to invest in the rebuild of Europe and Japan. Europe as a hedge against the Soviet expansionism. And I think, but it was the largest foreign aid policy in the history of the world by any country. The Belt and Road Initiative that's in effect today is 10 times in equitable dollars, offset by inflation, 10 times what the Marshall Plan is. But it's very transactional. And I think where China has done, they pay attention. Where China has gone and effectively used that money is pretty much where we are not. Now, we can't compete with the kind of money that they're offering, but they're very good at finding where we're underinvested, where we are underinvested in partners and allies, where those fragile states that Dana talked about are teetering. But the Chinese come in. Now, I'm not saying all foreign policy is benevolent and charity. It's not. But I think the difference is, I think the United States, our foreign policy and our the money that we provide, I think is based on a couple of assumptions that are economically based. Number one, that a healthy and educated population in these states is good for the world. It's good for us. It's good for our business, but it's also really good for them to have an educated and healthy population. China's looking for different things. They're looking for natural resources. They're looking for we have partners and allies. China has clients. And I think I really fundamentally, it's not propaganda. I fundamentally believe that's true because I've seen it in action in the Indo-Pacific. Where we have made some mistakes after the Cold War, we shut embassies and consulates down in a lot of the small island nations in the Indo-Pacific because, well, the Cold War is over. Well, guess who took advantage of that recently and who's moved in? We are now at our State Department are rapidly trying to reopen, or in some cases for the first time open embassies. We just opened one in Palau, but there's so many of these small Pacific islands that are strategically very, very important to the United States if we ever had a future fight, which we sure hope we don't. But we are rushing to get ambassadors there. But what's the message if you have an embassy and you have no ambassador? You've gapped the ambassadorship, either because you can't get it through Congress or because it's just really not that important. It's a small island. And so I think our State Department is double timing right now, trying to get consulars, trying to get ambassadors out to a lot of these islands. And I think our State Department and our military work very closely. When I was a colonel in Fallujah, I had a POLAD. I had a political advisor that worked for the ambassador. I worked for my generals, but my partner, where I spent pretty much all day with him, traveling through the Ramadi and Fallujah areas of Iraq in the middle of a fight. That was a State Department. It was that 1-2 punch. When we walked into a room, you had the Department of Defense and the Department of State as one working together. And I think that's invaluable. In Afghanistan, where I led 20,000 Marines in Afghanistan, 2009, 2010, again, I had a POLAD. I had a political advisor. And I think, today in the Indo-Pacific, commanders have political advisors from the State Department. So that representation, that whole of government U.S. representation is there. But critically important that we are investing in our partners and allies, both economically, militarily, with our advisors, with our presence. And I think diplomatically, we need to continue to flush out our consulates and our embassies because where we are not, the Chinese are in spades. And one last thing about China, the economic military piece here. We all know that they run the Panama Canal today. That should cause everybody some sleepless nights because that's true. You think about having to go around the Cape of Latin America to get anywhere. So they control that. They control the Panama Canal, which we should have never allowed to have happen. But it is what it is. Throughout Africa and Latin America, every time a port comes up for negotiation for who's going to run it, guess who gets that contract? It's China. They outbid everybody by 3 or 4 to 1. Why is China so obsessed with ports? What is it about ports that they are seized with that they have to? If you run a port, every container that came from every ship, what's in every container, where that ship came from, where it's going. It's data mining. And the understanding of that, controlling that amount of knowledge around the world is something that they are doing right now that is, again, very concerning to me. So, but investing, you cannot invest too much in partners and allies. The senator said it. I think I fundamentally have believe that as well. And I think we are doing our best effort right now. But we have a pretty strong adversary doubling down on pretty much everywhere we go.
With that, I want to open it up for a few audience questions. So if you have a question for our experts here on the stage, raise your hand high. There's some mics we can pass around. And please stand, just say your name and quickly ask your question.
Hi, this is Adam Haley with Goodwill of Kentucky. I have a question regarding workforce specifically. When it comes to rebuilding the arsenal of democracy, obviously we need workers to do that. How do we, what are your all's thoughts on getting more folks into the workforce so we can build that national security through our economic security?
Hey, I'll just take the beginning of that and hand it over to Nick. At the end of the Cold War, so when the wall came down in 90, 91, we had 35 shipyards in this country, 35 shipyards that worked on military ships, either building or maintaining and repairing. Today we have 6. 6. From 35 to 6. The ability, and I think what Ukraine has done, the fight for Ukraine has sort of been a little bit of an epiphany, a little bit of a wake-up call to our defense industry. We have less vendors now than we've ever had but we have huge companies, but we have less smaller companies that are willing to take a risk and develop. So it's an interesting time for us. But I think what Ukraine has done is sort of, because we sent so much munitions there, we going into our war stocks probably to send munitions to help Ukraine. And I think we realized our ability to make 155 artillery rounds, our ability to make a lot of the modern, more exquisite weapons is not on the scale that we would need to actually fight a war, nor is it on a scale that we would need to be able to support our allies. So I think there's a realization, just like we had the CHIPS bill, last year, which was very important, an investment. Taiwan is obviously making the chips that we're using in some of our most modern F-35, some of our equipment. Why aren't those made in the States? Because for a long time, obviously, we thought offshoring of anything, the global economy. We were in love with the notion of a global economy where it's just as cheap to make it in China or anywhere else. It's cheaper to make it there, and it's more efficient. And I think we found out during COVID that's a problem, and it continues to be a problem for us. We need to make stuff here. And so I think that great investment in making world-class microchips back in the United States. We also need to retool our defense industry because it is not ready. We talk about deterrence. Part of that deterrence is readiness. And the force can be as ready as possible, but if the defense industrial base is not ready, we got a problem.
Nick, if you could just take 1 second to answer that as it relates to how the global investments bring back to the national workforce, and then we'll take another.
Yeah, I was just actually real quick, just want to tie on to this and say there's a great book called Chip Wars, which really talks about the importance of chips to a whole host of various international issues and global issues. And it really, if you get a chance to read it, please do, because it's really enlightening on that. But from a workforce perspective, I think from our perspective, the key is we've got to be, I think we want to force people into 4-year degrees instead of the trades. And there's a lot of need for trades across the country for various reasons. And that's, to me, where we really need to focus. It's not everybody has to have a 4-year degree.
Thank you, Denise Sears. We've talked a lot about Ukraine, and we've talked a lot about the Far East. Africa is one of the largest geographical continents that is, at issue with what we're talking about today. And at SOS, we've seen the Chinese come in to a lot of the areas that we're working and offering, you so correct, clients, right? Not partners. But there's also been deemed the potentially fastest growing markets for the future. So I'd love to hear some thoughts. And I know we've had conversations with UPS, you have a presence there, we have a presence there. But I'd love to hear some thoughts on that because we've covered a lot of the world, but we got to talk about Africa.
Yeah, so let me jump in and talk about our partnership with Africa.
We could keep it to like 30, 45 seconds.
Oh, yeah. Let me keep it to, so Rwanda, for example, we have worked with Zipline to move blood supply for females that are hemorrhaging from pregnancy. And I will just tell you that because of COVID and the acceleration, we literally took what would take a generation in healthcare infrastructure and did it in a couple of years. You were talking about us only serving 12 hospitals in Rwanda to 464 in the matter of 5 years. And so that is the perfect example of the kind of collaboration that has to occur in order for healthcare delivery to move forward in Africa and other countries.
General, did you want to respond to the African?
I'm good.
Well, and you're very much right, Denise, because Africa is one of the largest growing populations. It's where 1 out of 4 workers will be in the future, and China is beating us to the punch there.
Yeah.
Any other questions? One more, and then I think we'll wrap it up.
Hi, Mike Wilson. My question is, here in America, China is also buying up farmland. And I know that we've enjoyed having the trade dollar be the US dollar forever. China is also making their trade partners now trade in their dollars and seeking to supplant the US dollar with their dollar as the trade dollar. Can you speak to the economic impact that will have on the world as well as the United States if that happens?
I'm going to let the general take that one. I don't think I have that's a tough question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I have an answer for that.
I think we can maybe try to help you find that answer from somewhere else, but that might be beyond our expertise up here on stage.
Yeah.
I'll get with you, Senator Wilson.
Well, thank you guys so much for being a part of our conversation today. And over the last 2 years and what you saw earlier, we've really been trying to answer the question, foreign aid, what's it worth? And I think this conversation today has made it very clear. It means safety for those who serve. It means customers for our businesses, and it means healthier lives here at home. And as we face an increase in global crises and the ramifications around the world, we really look forward to having you involved in the conversation moving forward about how critical America's investments are in development and diplomacy. And then I just want to close it out by saying, what's it worth to our national security in the U.S. to lead, for example, here at home and abroad? To the general, and then I'll close it out with you as well.
I think it means everything. I think the world, and I didn't realize, certainly as a young Marine, I didn't realize how important U.S. global leadership was. And as I continue to serve, I found it more and more. And it's amazing the amount of countries. And I'll just give you one example. On my out call, I had to do 18 out calls in 18 countries coming in and out of that job in the Indo-PACOM area. And I'm sitting in a country I won't name, and the defense minister starts wire brushing me about, why are you training with the Malaysian Naval Infantry, but you're not training with mine? And I leaned in. I said, Minister, we're ready to start doing the same thing for your Marines and Naval Infantry that we're doing. And then he leaned forward and he said, we just can't let China find out about it. And he smiled with a big grin. And it hit me in the head like a 2x4, because I grew up in the Marine Corps, where when we trained in any country around the world, on any continent, it was front page news. Hey, look at us. We're training with the U.S. Marines. Look at us. We're training with the U.S. Air Force, Navy, Army. Aren't we great? We're training with the Americans. Now, the corrosive impact, the corrosive economic impact of China's money is causing partners and allies to say, hey, I love you, but let's keep it on the down low. I don't want anyone to know. And that was a wake-up bell for me, that we're not where we need to be when countries are taking money from China. Again, the corrosive impact of money as a weapon system. China uses money as a weapon system in a way that no one ever has. And so today, again, we should all be very, very concerned of that corrosive impact on alliances, on partners. And so I'll leave it at that. A little more than 30 seconds. But
A little more than 30 seconds.
Well,
30 seconds,
And I'm
Nick.
going to
What's
be
it
less
worth?
than 30 seconds, even though it's already been said. It means absolutely everything.
Well, thank
And
you
I
both.
think we all know that. But before I finish, if that's okay,
Oh,
Dana,
yes. Nick
I'm going to use, I'll reserve my 30 seconds for this. General, we appreciate your service to our country. And as UPS, which has lots of veteran companies, I have a challenge coin that I'd like to present you.
oh,
And we're going to do this the right way. And the general can explain how the challenge coins work, because you have to give it a certain way too. But thank you very much. Thank you for your service.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeremy Tolbert. I'm the Deputy National Outreach Director for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. I'm going to close things out today with a few thank yous. First off, General, thank you. Fascinating conversation. Nick, thank you. Dana, thank you for moderating such a unique and interesting conversation. A few more thank yous. Leader McConnell, who had to leave, really appreciated his insights today. Scott Jennings, Ashley Watts, and Denise Sears, of course, thank you both. Members of our Kentucky Advisory Committee, thank you all for being here. Our South Initiative Chair, Coca-Cola, and all of our wonderful partners today. And of course, all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Thank you all. The best part of my job is working with so many amazing leaders like all of you. We really appreciate your participation in this insightful discussion on why America's global leadership is critical to ensuring our economic prosperity and national security here at home. Your continued engagement to show why America's global leadership matters to the American South is critical. You're a part of an important group of people here in Kentucky and around the country who have the ability to make an impact. On that note, if you're new to USGLC, please opt in to our correspondence and emails. If you'd like to get involved with us, please see me after. We'd love to engage with each of you. Again, thank you for your support. Because of you and others across the country, America remains the leading force for good in the world. If you'll all join us for a dessert reception in the foyer to my right, to your left, immediately following the program. So thank you all. Have a great day.